We're going to go east to Cincinnati and talk to my man, Bill. Bill, how are you?
Hey, John. How are you doing?
I'm doing outstanding. How about you?
Doing great. Thanks for taking my call. I want to say I'm really happy you've been brought onto the Ramsey team, and I've really benefited from your YouTube videos and what you've done on the radio. So thank you so much for that, man.
Man, thanks, brother. I appreciate you. I'm still figuring out how YouTube works, but they tell me that if I keep plugging away, I'm going to learn how to do it right. So thank you so much, man. So how can I help?
Totally. Well, I've been married for about 7 years, and we have a 1.5-year-old son. So my question is, what are your insights on raising boys and how that would relate to the attack on masculinity we are seeing these days?
So define, number one, let me back up. Congratulations on having a little baby. We waited, I think my wife and I, 7 or 8 years to have our first kid. So I remember being where you are, and you are square in the middle of it. And I want to promise you things get awesome.
Yes, sir.
In a bit. They get awesome.
So it's tough, but rewarding.
Describe the attacks. What are you talking about?
Well, you know how they just kind of in the media and this society is talking about this toxic masculinity. And so I want to try and raise my son to just be comfortable in his own skin about being a man. And obviously he's 1.5, so he's got a long way to go. But how can I, as a father, be encouraging that, who he is okay, and being a man and being a godly masculine man is okay.
So let me ask you, man, how are you feeling attacked? What are some things you're hearing in the media? What are some things you're hearing from people that you work with? What are some attacks you're feeling personally that you're worried are going to rub off on him? Give me some specifics.
I would say, like, being the leader, like not in a dominating way over your house or your wife or anything like that, but as we're called to be the leaders of our houses, there's this, I guess we would say, attack on that. There's it's frowned upon that men take charge and are looked to as the leaders, and being confident, like a man that's confident and bold, is frowned upon. I guess those things, and I guess I'm kind of navigating these waters myself too.
Right.
Within the past 5 years, it seems to be really a hot topic. And so I'm kind of trying to even think about it and figure out, like, what am I doing that people might say is toxic? And I don't feel like I'm being toxic. I feel like I'm a nice person, and I'm just trying to do the best I can. But the blinds are getting so blurred these days with not even just this, so many things. But especially with just being a man and masculinity, it feels like they're blurring those lines. What do you think?
So, man, number one, I want to applaud you for the question, and I want to applaud you for being reflective. And number two, I want to applaud you for being a dad who's thinking ahead. So many of us get so busy, so exhausted, and we're just trying to get to the next day, to the next day, to the next day, that we lose this intentionality. This moment where we can just pause, whether we're driving or we're mowing the yard or whatever, and just to think, man, what kind of world is my son inheriting, and what can I do right now to participate there? Okay. So Here's a couple of things. So I live in the mental health world, and the APA, the American Psychological Association, put out a paper, maybe in a year or 2, 3 years ago, on toxic masculinity. And if I was to sum it up in my own language, here's how I would distill it down. The things you mentioned about leadership, confidence, taking charge, domination, I think the reason those words have got a bad rap is because those things have been used, those mantras, those feelings, those actions have been used to abuse people, to hold hostage people, and to really get people's way. You used a really, really important word that if you can leave this phone call with, that if the listener can leave this phone call with, I will feel like I've done my job for the next 6 months. You said, I don't want my son to feel like he is over. And that is the main word. When I think of toxic masculinity, for whatever that means, for whatever different group, right? I think of the difference between over versus with. And so if I was to distill down what I think toxic masculinity looks like, is that we force our boys to prove their worth. They do not understand at an early age that they have inherent value just because they're people, just because they're beings, just because they are worthy of being loved. We set them up in conquests and in contests to, when you do these things, then you will prove your worthiness. When you do these things, then you will be worthy of fill in the blank, being a leader, being a husband, being a man, being a whatever. This idea that the bigger arms win. And often in nature, that's the way it works, right? The bigger lion wins, man. And I think that the challenge there is we look around at our communities, we look around at our country, and if we look back the last 100 years, the attack from folks who have not been in power, right, are looking at it and saying, hey guys, y'all have always been president. Hey guys, y'all have always run the finance system. Hey guys, y'all have run fill in the blank of institutions, churches, schools, whatever. And every one of those institutions is a mess right now. And so if I have a job, right, if I've got a business that I'm running and the business is a mess, the buck stops with the leader. And so as a guy, I am balancing two things right now. Number one, this idea of what does a head of a household look like? What does leadership look like? Leadership does not look like, head of household does not look like, I get 51% of the vote. I'm more powerful. I'm stronger. I get to decide. What I'm training my son, who's 10 now, is leadership means you get underneath everything and hold it up. Leadership means you go last. Leadership means if there is a fight to be had, you go first. You are the first one to be on the front of the line, and when people are eating or people are showering or people are in need, you go last. And so this idea of not the leaders eat the nicest, the leaders eat what's left. And so it's this idea of submission. And that is a reframing of masculinity for me. Another thing is this idea of being with. I want my son to know that when he is married, when he's got kids, when he is a community leader, when he is a boss, when he is a coworker, his job is not to look for people to have dominion over. It's to look to people to have relationships with. And the most effective way, we say it here at Ramsey Solutions. I work for Dave Ramsey here. Business moves at the speed of trust. And trust is fostered around a table where people eat together, they commune together, they hang out together. It's when people are with. Now, somebody who's in charge, the boss, if you will, the buck stops there, right? Somebody's got to make a call, and that can be man and woman. I report to Amy, who reports to Jeremy, who reports to Suzanne, who reports to Dave, right? So I've got two women. I think I've almost always had women leaders throughout my career. The buck stops with them, right? So whoever's the boss. But that's less about gender and more about position. So when it comes all the way back to it, I'm talking a lot just to say this. I want my son to know he's got value, that he is allowed to feel feelings, that he is allowed to love deeply, that he's allowed to use words and ask for, hey, Dad, can I have a hug? I want him to know that he is valuable just because he exists. And I want to teach him to use his strength, he is a monster, dude. My son, I think my wife is injecting him with roids on the weekends, dude. He's huge. I want him to use his physical position. He's a big kid. I want him to use that wisely and boldly and strongly, and also not to not to overpower and crush people, but to serve people, right? So that's my spiel on masculinity. How does that ring true in your heart when you hear it?
That's great. I mean, definitely a lot of good points to reflect on. I really liked especially what you said in the beginning about we sometimes put the earning mark on our boys that if you do X, Y, and Z, or we expect you to do whatever, good at football or win the sports game or something like that, and then you're doing your job then. Tearing down that wall and just loving them for who they are and not getting caught into that trap. that's a great insight, I think.
And here's the other thing that you're just going to have to hold close to your heart, and that is this. I say this often, and it's just a good saying to put in your back pocket. And it's not by my hand, but in my lap. You are a guy raising a young son in a cultural mess. We owe too much money. We're having to deal with racial reconciliation that we have swept under the rug and not dealt with for years and years and years and years and years. We are dealing with international challenges. We are dealing with weather challenges. I got family in Houston right now waiting for the second hurricane in like a week to come through. We've got fires raging in California and Colorado. I mean, things are a mess. And it's just been dropped in your lap in this little snapshot in history. And so people are going to talk bad about you just because you're you. And you get to decide, am I going to carry that baggage or I'm going to set it down? I'm going to work really hard to be a good guy in my home, to be a good man in my community, in my neighborhood, to listen. When I feel like someone's hurting my feelings, I want to lean in and say, what can I learn from this? And the rest of them is going to put that nonsense down and raise a son who knows how to love, who knows how to speak up for himself, and who knows how to serve and protect his community. And service comes from underneath and behind, man. And if you get on that track, if you can teach him to hear when he needs to hear and to not carry other nonsense bricks down, everyone's going to be throwing rocks at you, man, regardless of what it is you do. They're going to throw rocks at you for who you are, for what you want to be, for the son you want. That's just going to be life, man. It's happened throughout history and it will always happen. I want to know where my values are grounded. I want my son to know he's loved. I want my daughter to know she's loved. I want my wife to know she's loved. And I want them to see it and feel it in me. Not just words. They got to hear that too, but see it and feel it. And brother, Bill, the fact, again, I want to reiterate this, the fact that you are already thinking this through as a dad of a 1.5-year-old, man, blessings to you, brother. You are way, way, way ahead of the curve.